We have a very special guest tonight who's going to speak, and if you guys mess around, I will squish your head. And normally I wouldn't do that to anybody else. That's really weird. Normally I wouldn't say that about anybody else, but this time it's because the speaker tonight is none other than my wife, Alyssa. Everybody give it up for Alyssa.
Okay, hi guys. Okay, I'm excited and so incredibly nervous because you guys are intimidating. But at first, Tom asked me a month or two ago, and I said no. And then I felt a little convicted, and I'm like, all right, I'll push myself. I'll challenge myself. So tonight we are going to look at two captivating healings of Jesus that involves two females. Can I hear the girls? Woo woo! All right. But before we get into tonight's scripture, we have to look at some Old Testament laws. And boys, this is where your mature meters have to go up. Abby Phyllis. No, Leviticus 15:19. When a woman has her regular flow of blood, the impurity of her monthly period will last 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean till the evening. It goes on to say that anything that she touches, sits on, lays on, it will also be considered unclean, and you are not allowed to touch her or anything that she has touched. You would have to wash yourself, and you would be unclean till the evening. When we skip over to Numbers 19:11, whoever touches a human corpse, gross, will be unclean for 7 days. Now, please understand that being unclean isn't necessarily a sin issue, but it's a holiness issue. Anything that can bring death, disease, or any sanitation problems is the opposite of God's standard, but we live in a fallen world, and so we have to navigate, through that reality. So just keep these laws, these standards in your mind. Okay. So now let's turn our Bibles or your apps to Matthew chapter 9, verse 18. So I'll give you a few seconds to do that. When you're there, say Chipotle. Okay. Matthew 9. While he was saying this, wait, what was he saying? Right? Context is king, right? Now, what did you think Tom always said there? Context is king or keen? Okay, moving on. Okay. I thought it was keen. Okay. All right, in the previous verses, Jesus is talking to his disciples about old and new wineskins. And it's a beautiful picture. I wish we could dive into it, but it's a beautiful picture of how God is up to a new thing. He's up to a new covenant, a new creation, a new humanity, a new family of God. It's awesome. Verse 18. While he was saying this, a synagogue leader came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live." Right? You don't do that, right? Jesus got up and went with him, and so did the disciples. Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. Again, that's a big no-no. She said to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed." Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter," he said. "Your faith has healed you." And the woman was healed at that moment. When Jesus entered the synagogue leader's house and saw the noisy crowd and people playing pipes, he said, "Go away. The girl is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took the girl by the hand, and she got up. News of this spread through all the region. This first part of the story, we see a synagogue leader. He's a man of importance, a guy who had power, prosperity, influence, but he was also a father. And he was in complete desperation with the death of his father or his daughter. And we can't glaze over that. I know we can get used to these miracles and we're like, yeah, we get it. You know, God, Jesus healed people. But we need to capture his emotions. How often do we see grown men kneeling at another man's feet, right? And it doesn't happen often. And to top it off, this guy was a religious leader. He was part of the squad that would criticize and ridicule Jesus. And this religious leader was willing to risk his reputation. And we don't see the religious leaders of that time bowing before Jesus. This one does. His desperation led him to bow at Jesus' feet, led him to risk a prominent position to save his daughter. I can remember a time with Tom and his passions for our girls. We were at my parents' house, and they have stairs, and Lily loves the stairs. And so we were packing our stuff up. Our room was upstairs, and so we made a barricade for her not to fall down the stairs. So I'm off packing. Tom's downstairs talking to my dad, and he hears the thump. Lily had made her way through the barricade and started to tumble down the stairs. Now, Tom was in the middle of a conversation. He heard it, and he immediately stopped with my dad and ran to the stairs to see Lily just helplessly falling. And he catches her right in the mid of the fall. The sight of seeing Lily helplessly falling just freaked the crap out of Tom. I mean, his appetite was gone. And when do you see Tom say no to porcano or to food? Like, right? Like, he was shaken up. He was so afraid. And he could not get the image of her falling and just the what if he wasn't there to catch her. And, you know, there was fear stemmed from an old customer Tom had back in the day who lost their daughter from falling down the stairs. So I hope like this fear, this picture gives you this feel of this father's desperation. And this guy's daughter was dead, right? Okay. This father, the synagogue leader, and had his fierce love and complete vulnerability on full display. And Jesus sees his desperation, and he responds immediately. This father goes from being hopeless to hopeful. Jesus' response isn't, okay, I'll do it if you continue to love me when things are great. He doesn't say, oh, you're a synagogue leader, I'll help you out. He doesn't say, you better love me just as desperately after I do this. He simply responds, and immediately at that. You know why? Because he is good, and he cares, and he honors those who are seeking him in desperation. For those that are taking notes, I want to highlight Jesus' embracements. So number 1, Jesus embraces our desperations. All right, verse 19, when Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples, just then a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, if I only touch his cloak, I will be healed. Now we know from this passage and other Gospels that she had battled this for 12 long years. And in Mark chapter 5, we see that she saw many doctors, she spent all that she had, and her condition was actually getting worse. And so remember, back in Leviticus, right, the flow of the blood was, for a period, so it would last for 7 days. She would be unclean. Well, this lady, she had a disease, she had a problem that lasted forever, so she was unclean for 12 years. She would be living in isolation. She would not be able to go to the synagogue, not be able to be touched or touch anything. Like a person would go crazy living like that. Like imagine not being able to go anywhere or touch anything. And not to mention her embarrassment. Her ailment could have kept her from marriage. It could have caused a divorce. And to be an unmarried woman in those days would have been terrifying. because it was so male-dominated. And for a single older woman, it was tough to provide for herself or to be taken care of by others. If it were today and you had a medical condition like this woman, it would be tough to provide for yourself just because of the extreme discomfort and embarrassment. This 12-year struggle left her in such desperation that she was willing to break the law and push her way through the crowd, willing to defile the crowd and Jesus. She's like, I don't care who is cleaner and clean at this point. Like, I'm getting to this guy. Like, I'm done. But little does she know that her bravery and her faith would launch her into the kingdom reality of Jesus' lordship. What happens next is Jesus sees her. Verse 22, "Take heart, daughter," he said. "Your faith has healed you." And this woman was healed at that moment. That brings me to embracement number 2. Jesus embraces your greatest embarrassments. I love that line. Take heart, daughter. That word daughter is an intimate term. It's a word a loving father speaks to his daughter that he loves. This poor woman who has suffered for 12 long years, who most likely had not been touched or even possibly talked to, and Jesus calls her daughter. He didn't have to do that. He could have just healed her, but this God of ours has such an attention to detail. He knows where we've been, he knows what we've been through, and he knows what we need at the moment. You know, another thing that I love is that Jesus was interruptible. He wasn't expecting her. He was, on his way to go help, this synagogue leader, and he stops for her. He's not caught off guard. He's completely interruptible. He sees her and he heals her. How often do we treat certain moments in our life like it's a burden or an interruption to what we're doing? Maybe at school there's a student that sits by themselves all the time, and you're over here with your friends having a good time. But, there's a student over here alone. Or maybe it's a homeless person you see every morning on your way to school or work. The old lady walking her heavy groceries to the car. I don't know what it looks like. But are you guys interruptible? Jesus was so in tune to the Father. He was led by the Spirit and kingdom-minded that he could feel the one touch of someone in desperate need in a crowd full of people. Embracement number 3 is Jesus embraces interruptions. He was willing to be interrupted by this surprise, and it was a divine moment. With this delay of Jesus, because, he's on his way to heal or take care of this dead daughter, I don't want to speculate too much here, but I wonder what Jairus, his name was Jairus, the synagogue leader, was doing or thinking on the side. I would like to think that this delay was to encourage his faith. This father was so torn up over the death of his daughter. If it were me, I would have been like, okay, Jesus, we have a pressing matter. My daughter is dead. This lady is not. You see, whenever the Lord delays in moving and seems to be working in other people or other places, be observant of where he is and what he's doing, because there lies lessons for you as well. It's a faith building you. Be patient and keep your eyes open. Verse 23, when Jesus entered the synagogue leader's house and saw the noisy crowd and people playing pipes, it was common in those days for the family members to hire a mourner. You could be a professional crier and get paid for it. And then they would hire flute players and they would just play music over the dead. Side note, I Googled that because they still practice that over in the Middle East, and it's something else. Babe, if I go, you can hire Savannah, Julia, somebody sings real good. Okay, verse 24, he said, go away, the girl is not dead but asleep. But they laughed at him. Now Jesus here, I think he knew something that they hadn't understood, and that was that Jesus had resurrection power. Up until this point, the scriptures records miracles, but not resurrection. Could Jesus seriously raise people from the dead? But here they are mocking Jesus. They went straight from wailing and crying to laughing. In Mark chapter 5, verse 40, there's more details of what's going on. That after Jesus had put the crowd outside, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. In this moment of sadness and chaos and noise, Jesus clears the space, just leaving the parents, bringing privacy, peace, and stillness to the situation. How true is this? Have you been in a situation that was just nuts, and when you called on Jesus, he brought you that peace or that stillness? There's a time in my life that stands out to me. And I've shared it to some of you before, so bear with me if you've heard it. But I was dating a guy for 3 years, and I was engaged for another 3 years. It was like that classic Pam and Roy from The Office, right? Like whenever that part would come on, I'd be like, dude, this is too real. But anyways, so we were together for 6 years, and you know, in the time, like there was ups, there's downs, but there was a lot of red flags in that relationship that I let my pride just cover over. There was some weird obsessions, unfaithfulness, negativity, no spiritual connection. There's just a lot. And so to save detail, because who wants to hear that? This is where it gets good. We're finally planning the wedding. And my dad starts to become distant with me. And I'm a little bit of a daddy's girl. And this was devastating to me. I'm like, I'm getting married. Like, we should be happy. But it progresses to him saying, like, I'm not going to walk you down the aisle. Okay. I'm not even going to go to your wedding. Oh. Okay, well, while this is going on, my invitations were out. You know, I had RSVPs already coming in, and my dad's, like, pulling this, like, hey, And so when he's struggling, he seeks counsel from the pastor of the church we've been going to, and, you know, gets to the elders, and then the elders were all in on it, and then the pastor that I was really close with and his wife, like, calls me in for a meeting, and they talk to me about, like, my feelings and my dad and all this stuff, and they suggest that I pray about it for a week. And so I'm just a hot mess. I'm, like, confused, but at the same time, I know certain things that, you know, I should do. And so for that week, I just prayed like crazy. I'm just like, Lord, like, and we're getting married in a month, okay? So I'm supposed to make a decision in a week. And yeah, I mean, mess. So I'm praying. I'm like, Lord, what do you want me to do? Just tell me, make it clear, give me this peace. Like, I don't know what to do. And so this long week goes by, and I'm with my friend, and I'm like, dude, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm supposed to give him an answer. And I walked into their office, and they asked me what my decision was, and I said I couldn't marry him. Like, nope, I got my answer. Right then and there, I got the peace, I got stillness, and it was at the very last minute, but I got it. And when we have these promises of God in an impossible situation, we need to put out the mocker, the noise, if you will, while we wait and watch what he does. And you know, there's a mocker in all of us. The flesh that will rise up and question things, like, God will never do that. That promise will never happen in this situation or this circumstance. And it's so great to take those mockers and put them out. You know, there could be even people in your life that they are wonderful. Maybe they're even Christian. But it might be best not to talk to them. They might be, they might, in your time of difficulty, not able to nurture your faith. They might mock you. They might feed into your unbelief. And it's okay to put the mocking away until you see what God is going to do. So in closing, these two healings are so incredibly important to us that we chew on it for a little bit. There's two different economic class here. There's a wealthy leader and an unclean woman. And Jesus is ready for every person in every city, in every situation, regardless of class. These miracles teach that Jesus' ability to help is limitless. Perhaps you say, I would love to have Jesus touch me, but I don't feel his touch. Then be that bleeding woman and push your way through the crowd and touch him. There is no sickness untouchable for Jesus. There's no problem that is too big, too little for him. If you feel like your sickness isn't big enough or that you're not important or that Jesus isn't going to listen to you based on this world hierarchy of needs, just know and rest in the characteristics of Jesus that we see here, that he's interruptible, he cares, and you are not a burden to him. And while we can rest in this, we also need to be a people that's interruptible. Let's be in tune with God the Father. Let's open our eyes and see what's around us that we need to take care of. Lastly, Jesus is willing to embrace all of us. He embraces desperation. He embraces our embarrassments. And he embraces interruption. And then he's willing to embrace all of us. All right, let's pray. Dear Jesus, I pray for our time together in small groups that you would just be speaking to our hearts on what what might be icky in us, what we might need to get rid of. I pray that our connection with our leaders would be intimate and real. Thank you, Lord, for being interruptible. Thank you for embracing us. Thank you for looking at us thank you for looking at us as clean. God, you're so good. Thank you for this night. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. So good.